to track our time.
Welcome back to ThinkTech. Here we are. It's a Monday afternoon, and why not talk to somebody in Beijing? Why not talk to a Hanakako, Keli'i Akina, who is now in Beijing, and his director of policy, Malia Blom Hill, who is now in Washington, D.C., straddling the world here at ThinkTech on a Hanakako. Fabulous. So let's begin the show with Keli'i Akina. Say hi.
Aloha, and Jay, just great to be back on ThinkTech Hawaii. Every week we're here, even if we're somewhere across the world. But welcome to all of you who are out there watching us, as well as Malia Hill, our policy director for the Grassroot Institute. Hello, Malia.
Hi, thank you for having me again.
Yeah, this really is quite incredible. Jay is there in Honolulu, the center of the universe. He's the master of the universe, and I'm all the way out in Beijing, and Malia is in Washington, D.C. Isn't that great, the way our technology brings us together nowadays?
Fabulous.
And that's really one of the distinctives of ThinkTech Hawaii and our partnership through the Grassroot Institute. In the show we call Ehana Kako. We want to take a look at global issues because in many ways global is local and local is global, and that's one of the things we're discovering all the time. I know, Jay, you're very concerned about the future of Hawaii, our technology, our society, our government, and so forth, and so are we at the Grassroot Institute. A lot of times when we stay in our own little field, we fail to see the solutions that the world is looking at, as well as the problems of the world. And when we look at that, our own problems find solutions. And that's one of the reasons that I'm here in China, because I think that resourcing Hawaii with the world and vice versa is really key to our solving the problems that we face today. What do you think, Malia?
You know, it's interesting you say that because, you know, this isn't something that I noticed when I was, young and wandering around Kauai and such. But as I got older and I traveled more, I noticed how Hawaii has its own distinct culture, distinct from the rest of the United States, and much more Asian. I mean, I don't think that most people understand until you go to the mainland, especially the East Coast. I mean, the culture shock. I remember I went to Florence when I was in college and spent a semester there. Went from Florence to Detroit and finally landed in Hawaii many, many hours later. And the difference between Florence and Hawaii was about the same as the difference between Washington, D.C. and Hawaii. The culture is so different. And I've always wondered, what can Hawaii take away? It seems odd. Why are we making such a big deal about this trip to China? But I think that, we haven't really, as a state, gone and taken the full advantage of that Asian connection. And I think I'd love for you to explain more. You're so much better at it. But I really want people to understand what the value of this effort is. So. And
I like the fact that you use the word value. You and I, as part of the Grassroot Institute of Hawaii, are concerned about values and want to get value out of all that we do. And the bottom line is this. We can stay in our own little world and try to solve our problems from within, or we can be world-class in every sense. World-class in terms of ideas, which travel across the world and travel across time. World-class in terms of resources, which are available to us now through today's technology from across the world. And world-class in terms of people. And if we can bring all of these things together, the great ideas, the great resources, the great people, all of them together to bear upon what we're trying to solve in Hawaii, we maximize the possibility of being able to have a great future. And to me, that makes the fact that you're in Washington, D.C., accessing resources for us all the time that we wouldn't necessarily have, and that our people are across the country and across the world, and we have relationships with similar organizations to ours here in Asia. All of that means that we can take the best of the world and bring it home. But it also goes the other way. Hawaii really has something to offer the rest of the world. I mean, whether that's the aloha spirit, and I don't say that trivially. I think there's something very tangible about our understanding of the aloha spirit, or whether it's our geopolitical location, which is crucial in the 21st century, or whether it's the potential for economies that we have not yet realized. Hawaii has the possibility of being a center for the globe as we move forward in the 21st century. Not the center of the world, as China has often conceived of itself, but one of the many centers. And so that's what makes it worthwhile to be here. Jay, like Malia, you've come from a place other than Hawaii. In fact, all of us, everyone, including native Hawaiians like myself, have come from somewhere other than Hawaii at some point. Jay, what are your reflections?
I do. Listening to you guys, I have some very specific thoughts. I just filed an article with the Honolulu Star Advertiser about trying to get back to a tech economy, which I think we lost in the last few years. And there are signs of recovery, but not very strong, but there are signs of recovery. It bears analysis. And one of the things that I think about when I write articles like this to try to evaluate how well we're doing against other places is this kind of schizophrenia we have. On the one hand, as you mentioned, Keli'i, we have this kind of arbitrage of ideas. So you travel to China, you see something you like, you bring it back with you. Very valuable. And you bring it back to a place where it doesn't exist, and now we have the benefit of that new idea. Very valuable. Sometimes maybe you'll bring back an idea that's not valuable, and or somebody maybe less well-meaning will bring an idea that's not valuable. And the question is picking the ideas that should be in the arbitrage. Not all ideas are optimal. Some are less than optimal than others. This is something out of George Orwell, An Animal Farm. Anyway, it's the same thing in the reverse direction. When we send ideas, we try to make an image for ourselves overseas. Whenever we have to be clever about it, we have to be smart. We have to project an image that we want to project. And I agree that we have the potential of both accepting great ideas on the arbitrage and then projecting great ideas. But I think it has to be mindful, thoughtful. It can't be at random, and it can't be with a sort of a cargo cult mentality where whatever comes in must be good, or whatever we have must go out. I think it has to be thoughtful.
I think you're absolutely right, Jay. Often I will compare Hawaii in terms of fiscal policy, in terms of gross domestic product on a per capita basis and so forth, with economic zones such as Hong Kong or Singapore. And an interesting response ensues quite frequently. Some people say, we don't want to become like Hong Kong. We don't want to become like Singapore. So why are you talking about Hong Kong and Singapore? But as you've put it, Jay, we have to be reflective of this process. We have to filter. We're not saying we want to become Hong Kong. We're not saying we want to become Singapore. But we have the capacity to ask questions like, what is it that they do that produces certain results and outcomes that would be good if they happened in Hawaii? Mm-hmm. And that's the analysis that we have to take, is to take a look at what kind of approach to the economy, what kind of approach to free markets is taking place elsewhere, and how can we perhaps use that to enhance what we have without sacrificing, of course, the distinctive of who we are.
Well, I think the important issue is the kind of filter you put on it, what kind of process you apply to, select the wheat from the chaff. And your reasoning, your your values when you do that are very important. I'll give you a small example. I don't know if I told you about this before, but we were doing a program upstairs in the Plaza Club here. And I thought it would be really valuable to hear about how this particular issue was being handled in Singapore. So I wanted to get a speaker who could discuss how it was being handled in Singapore. My committee said, no, you can't do that. I said, why not? Why can't we hear how they do this in Singapore? And members of the committee said, because Singapore has a problem with human rights, because Singapore canes people, because Singapore doesn't have the same system, the same set of values that the United States has. And so what they are doing there is not helpful for us. I disagreed with them, and since I was the chair of the program, I did it my way. But I think it's useful, it's instructive to see how some people will screen things out on the basis of a sort of an irrelevant point and sort of lose the benefit of it. So it goes back to the question of how you screen, what you have in your mind, what kind of analysis you use in finding the wheat and the chaff.
That's a perfect example. And I think that it brings up questions of thoughts in the mix. whenever we're looking at a phenomenon in another country or even in our own, we have to separate culture and tradition from values and actual concepts and ideas. And you see, if all you're doing is looking at what Singapore does, or what Beijing does, or anywhere in the world, you're absolutely right. Without a filter, you can bring in elements that may not be appropriate or relevant to our setting. This is where I'm so grateful for the work that Malia has done longer with Grassroot Institute than I have, and the work of the free market think tanks across the world. Whether we're talking about the ones in Washington, D.C., or in the 50 states, or the ones that I visited in Hong Kong, like the Lion Rock Institute, or later this week I'll be speaking at the Universal Institute of Economics in Beijing, and the Cathay Public Policy Institute. It doesn't matter where they are. These conservative free market think tanks identify ideas, concepts that work, concepts like individual liberty, when the individual is allowed to have autonomy and choices, and that is not interfered with by the government, but empowered by society, you have the opportunity for incentives like competition in the market. Secondly, limited accountable government, where government plays the appropriate role of protecting and of ensuring the foundations of law, but people are protected from the government. The government is limited to its role. Or third, individual liberty, free markets, and the free market, the free market in and of itself, in which the factors of competition, supply and demand, as well as the pricing are not determined by the government. Now, here's the thing. It doesn't matter what the culture is. It doesn't matter what the tradition is. When you identify the ideas that are great and that work, concepts that are valid and sound, you can transport them. So the short answer, or the short response, Jay, is I affirm what you have to say is that we need a filter. But that filter is going to be the quality of the ideas that we have, so that we can see what is really working underneath the culture.
You know, Keli'i, I'll give you a shorter response than that. I'll give you one that's quite immediate, and that is we're going to need to take a short break.
Very good.
That's Keli'i Akina, and we have Malia Blom Hill in Washington, D.C. Keli'i is in Beijing. This is Ehana Kako. We're calling this show, let's see, Grassroot in China, week number 2. We'll be right back after this break.
We want to thank our underwriters.
Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Maui Electric on Maui and Hawaii Electric Light Company on Hawaii Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve.
Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company.
The High Tech Development Corporation, the state's leading technology agency, attached to the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism.
Castle and Cook Hawaii, with a time-honored legacy that spans more than 160 years and revolves around its mission of investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state.
Hawaii Gas, formerly the Gas Company, a proponent of the Liquefied Natural Gas Initiative, helping Hawaii achieve its transition to clean energy and a better energy future.
Collateral Analytics, a Hawaii-based tech company empowering the real estate industry with greater and faster access to the tools and data they need to make better informed property investment decisions.
I'm Nicole Horry. Thanks so much for joining us on ThinkTech.
I'm Maria Kashem. See you next time.
Well, welcome back.
We're back. We're live. That's Keli'i Akina. He's in Beijing. I wish I was in Beijing, but I probably want to have my gas mask. And Malia Blom Hill, she's in Washington. She doesn't need a gas mask. Although she
Only
probably
when I go to the hill.
probably need hip waiter boots once in a while. This is Ehana Kako, and we're talking about Grassroot in China, week number 2. Take it away, Keli'i.
Terrific. You know, and this is a great opportunity just to say a little bit about why we're here. We believe in leveraging resources at Grassroot Institute. So I had this wonderful opportunity of an academic award to be an exchange faculty member of Peking University for 3 weeks here. My trip is basically paid for, and in exchange, I write a paper and present it at an international conference sponsored by Chinese universities and Korean universities at the end of the time here. Fortunately, my paper is fundamentally done. I just need to consult with some colleagues. That gives me some wonderful free time. And during this free time, I have a choice. I can either walk the Great Wall for the next 2 weeks, or I can meet with the wonderful people who are doing the kind of work that Grassroot Institute in Hawaii is doing. And so we have the opportunity to meet with the equivalent of think tanks that are committed to individual liberty, free market, and limited accountable government, as well as other groups, and the opportunity to even raise some resources for Grassroot while we're here. So what a great opportunity. For those of you who are supporters of Grassroot, I want to say this is an exciting opportunity for us, and it can expand both our influence and our capacity. In addition, there's a word. The word of the day is guanxi. Guanxi. Guanxi is the word that makes everything work in China. Guanxi is your network of influence. And nothing happens in China unless you expand your network of influence. And so the purpose of this mission here to China is to expand the network of influence of Grassroot and the network of influence of Hawaii as we bring resources back and connect with the world. So does that sound like a good thing, Malia?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I wanted to throw out there, you know, I worked in policy, free market, liberty, and other sort of political issues for a long time. And I think one thing that people don't really know until you're inside it is that, strangely, it's harder to spread good news. It's sort of counterintuitive. You know, it's always don't be the bearer of bad news. Well, when it comes to ideas, it's actually harder to be the bearer of good news. It's very easy to run around saying, you know, this thing is terrible. We need to stop this thing. You have a very discreet answer. Let's pass a law to stop that thing. But when it comes to spreading sort of positive ideas, there's ideas that the government should get out of the way, that we should have less government, that we should have, you know, fewer regulations, that the free market works. These are very positive ideas. And it counterintuitively, it's more difficult to get people to understand their value. It's the harder job, so to speak. And, you know, I think I want people to sort of understand that when you go on and explain how you're doing that, because I don't think people really always know that can be a great challenge. And then you throw in the cultural mix into the mix, and that makes it even more interesting. So I want to know how that's been going for you.
Well, that's a great segue into talking a little bit about the first part of our itinerary. I spent the entire week in Hong Kong and just arrived in Beijing, so we can talk a little bit about that. And I'm just going to recalibrate here to make sure that I'm still on with you. Can you hear me? Am I?
You're fine.
Great. Okay. I think I just had a little glitch over here, and if I do fade out, just take over. Hong Kong. For about a century under the control of the British Empire, celebrating its emancipation, if you will, depending upon who you are. And it now belongs to the People's Republic of China. What an interesting opportunity to talk about how free market ideas work. And so everywhere I went, the relationship between China and Hong Kong was a very relevant topic of discussion. The first group that I spoke to was the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong, which is interesting because it combines membership which consists of Chinese nationals as well as a good number of Americans and even some Europeans. And they have a unique perspective because they see Hong Kong as an opportunity. And the reason that most people are there in the American Chamber of Commerce, representing the major American corporations, is because their fundamental issue is how do we use Hong Kong in order to make money and in order to build our economy. And so they're very concerned in their understanding about the relationship between Hong Kong. And so in that conversation, in that opportunity to present our ideas and our conversation, one of the things that interested me was the interest that the members of the chamber have in how Beijing is going to navigate its attempt to model parts of China, such as Shanghai, Shenzhen, cities along the southeastern coast, its attempt to model economic zones after Hong Kong, without tampering in Hong Kong. And that seems to be a little bit of a dynamic that they're working with. I know you thought a little bit about that, Malia.
Yeah, that was something I was very interested in hearing how Hong Kong reacted, and then when you get to, when you got to Beijing and such, how they saw it. The perspective from the West has been, oh well, that's very nice that you're going to try that, but we don't think you're gonna pull it off, and that's sort of our outsider's perspective. On the other hand, the perspective from the West always tends to be tinged with a bit of suspicion and I would say almost fear of mainland China. So I almost feel like they're kind of rooting against, so to speak. So
certainly, an interesting conversation that I had with Paul Chung, who is the founder and former chairman of the board of DHL Asia. We went to his fabulous office. He's now retired from that position, but continues to be a major player in business in Hong Kong. He reflected upon the issue as a Chinese, as a Chinese himself, and he said that he sees a fundamental difference in the way the mainland China has dealt with labor and the way Hong Kong has dealt with labor. And he's not all that optimistic about whether China at large can reproduce the Hong Kong miracle, if you will, because he sees a radical difference in terms of the way labor is understood and the way labor is treated. Generally, he believes that China at large is still in the industrial factory model of resources. So labor is treated as a factor of production. In other words, in a factory, you have components and parts and processes, and the industrial model depends upon everything being reproduced over and over again in the same way. So labor has often been treated that way and is treated well when it plays its role. But when individuals differ from the role, it creates a problem. Even if the way they differ, it brings excellence and improves the process, that itself creates a problem. And he said that China is still fundamentally in that mode, whereas Hong Kong, on the other hand, and Singapore have evolved into a post-industrial mode in which individuals are valued as thinkers, as people who can make decisions, who can be creative, who can actually alter the rules and create new rules, and that the entrepreneurial spirit requires that. It was quite fascinating to see that following his phenomenal career in both mainland China and in Hong Kong, that he would see that it boils down to the way people are treated. And for us at Grassroot, that dovetails with our fundamental belief that if you want a free market, you have to have the rule of law. And if you have the rule of law, you have to affirm human worth. And it seems that the failure of China overall to have fundamentally affirmed human worth and the need for them to move into that gives them the greatest challenge in being able to reproduce the Hong Kong miracle. Jay, what do you think about that?
It's hard to put me on the spot about that. I have a lot to say about it, but I think I got to take a short break in order to get my thoughts together, if you don't mind, Keli'i. So we're going to take a short break. That's Keli'i Akina and Malia Blom Hill in Washington, D.C. Keli'i is in China, in Beijing. We're talking about Grassroot week number 2, Grassroot in China week number 2 on Ehana Kako. I'm Jay Fidell. We'll be right back after this break. Aloha, I'm Jay Fidell for ThinkTech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaiian Foreign Trade Zone, number 9, has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBED, the Hawaii Department of Business, Economic Development and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program. It does so to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Jay Fidell of ThinkTech. Mahalo. We've returned. We're on Ehana Kako. We're talking about Grassroot in China, week number 2, with Keli'i Akina in Beijing. and Malia Blom Hill in Washington, and me, Jay Fidell, here in Honolulu. What a fantastic thing. This is such a, we got a map for the studio here, and we're putting this on the map. Every foreign location that we hit with Skype, either audio or video, we put on the map. So the map is getting plastered with little red dots. And you, by the way, both you guys are a red dot now. That's what you are.
Grassroot should send you to Paris so we can expand your map.
Exactly.
Yes.
Anyway, I think the relationship, and I'm fresh off a discussion with Alan Ma, who's a local attorney here, who is Chinese and who practices in the area of immigration investment with China here in Honolulu. We had a discussion only on Friday about the relationship of Hong Kong and and China, and you can see that, of course, on ThinkTechHawaii.com and Ustream. But I found it was very interesting. You go in and you start with the notion that the money traditionally has come through Hong Kong, that there are businessmen in Hong Kong and women, who make investments in China. That's what they do. They invest in many Chinese firms, including what used to be a state-owned enterprise, SOE. Now, for certain enterprises, you're allowed to invest directly, which is a change. And they make a lot of money doing this. And Hong Kong, has value to the Chinese government because of its totally capitalistic nature, or more capitalistic nature. And it's a kind of a tax haven because the taxes aren't that bad. And it's a place where people are freer to protest, for example. And the Chinese government doesn't want to change that. However, they would like to moderate it. And that brings me to this free trade zone that was recently established, maybe less than a month ago, in Shanghai, where the government has marked a place on a map and said this is going to be a free trade zone, and we're going to let you have greater, trading freedom in this area, and we want to sort of emulate Hong Kong. And the question is, what are they doing? Why are they doing this? Wasn't Hong Kong the gateway, the financial gateway? Why are they trying to establish another gateway in Shanghai? And Alan's opinion on that, which I thought was very interesting, and I leave it for you to think about, is they are trying to show Hong Kong that Hong Kong doesn't have a pass on everything, and that China, if it wants, can put the brakes on Hong Kong or compete with Hong Kong. And that's why they're doing this. Not necessarily to establish a free trade zone, but only to show Hong Kong that it doesn't have complete control over the issue. How you like that?
Well, that's interesting. First of all, I respect the opinion. However, it's very difficult to characterize a policy and its motivation when it comes from China.
Of course.
So I would be very cautious to say this is such and such is the reason that Beijing has pumped up or has created a special economic zone in Shanghai. Actually, in context, special economic zones are not new and not motivated solely by the existence of Hong Kong. The first zone is Shenzhen, which is a city in the south, not very far from Macau, between Hong Kong and Macau. And China was able to bring this city into existence virtually to be a freer, I put an R at the end of that, a freer market in order to operate effectively based upon freer market principles. And it has its own stock exchange. It has a higher level of governance autonomy from the federal government in Beijing. And the purpose for that is so that it can have greater freedom of fiscal policy in order to attract investment. And Shenzhen has been a phenomenal success.
Well, wasn't Shenzhen the original industrial city right near the New Territories, not too far away, and maybe half an hour bus ride or so from the New Territories? And the reason it was so successful is because it has all these factories that are selling into Hong Kong.
But what is most interesting is that the growth sector has been the financial services. Shenzhen has become a 21st century city. And I communicate with people in Shenzhen regularly, and the irony is is even to the level of the caliber and quality of internet service and so forth. It's a cut above. It really is. Now, what's happening here is something that does come out of Chinese policy. They so to say that Shanghai's freer, and I use the word R, not free economic zone, but freer, because there really is no absolutely free economic zone. But Shanghai's freer economic zone, freer market economic zone, competitive zone, to say that that is merely a reaction to Hong Kong doesn't really give much recognition of the context of the direction China was already going. Now, on the other hand, there's something that I think we need to recognize in the way free markets work. Having another free market in the neighborhood is not a bad thing at all. You know, Malia, you remember all the times you walk down Waikiki and you see an ABC store on every block. Now I think there are 3 ABC stores on every block. Is that right, Jay? What do you think?
I just saw Paul Kosasa at the Symphony last week, and I think that must be true. It must be 3 on every block.
Well, you know, at first the instinct is to say, well, if another ABC store moves in on the block, that's going to cut into my profits. But what has happened is that there are so many ABC stores that the combined sales and profits of all those ABC stores is greater than what you would have if you'd had the same number of different branded stores all together and combined. And what is it? The concept is that something good has become available, and there's a synergy that promotes it. Actually, if Shanghai becomes a free market zone and it in any way emulates what Hong Kong has done, the free market nature creates competition between these zones, and the competition between these zones will make each one better than it is by itself. That is the understanding of competitive free markets. And when government steps out of the way and begins to let its regions or its states have some measure of economic autonomy and then compete with one another, we have what we call at Grassroot Institute competitive federalism. And competitive federalism means that everybody does better. It so happens in the United States we have a very hindered federalism, and the federal government interferes in competition between the states. That puts Hawaii at a tremendous disadvantage. So I'm not so sure that we should see, or that China would be using Shanghai as a political vehicle to snub Hong Kong. I think that there are a lot of smart economists in the Communist Party. The Communist Party has quite a bit of diversity, and I think I heard an estimate that at least a third of the members of the bureaucracy have their master's degrees from schools across the world, especially in the United States. Wharton and Stanford and MIT and Harvard and so forth. They understand the power of competitive free markets. China actually will not be harming Hong Kong by opening up new free markets. It actually will be enhancing what Hong Kong is able to do by giving Hong Kong more centers with which to compete. Thoughts about that, Malia?
I was going to say, is Hong Kong threatened by that? You know, it's interesting, you know, we were talking about basically a top-down sort of effort at controlled capitalism, which is sort of the opposite.
Yeah, that's a great question. Is Hong Kong threatened by that? And I can tell you, as of my conversations last week at the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong and with one of the think tanks, Lion Rock, I get the exact opposite sense. There's an excitement about going in and investing in Shanghai. See,
those guys are indefatigable. They are the consummate businessmen. They are amazing what they do.
You see, we have to watch out for our parochial thinking that we have in Hawaii. I'm sorry to say that, but I love Hawaii with all my heart. And sometimes we see opportunities as threats. The opportunity of having competitors is not a threat. It is the challenge which makes us stronger. Think of the Olympics. When the finest athletes who are world class learn that they're going to be competing against the best athletes in the world who might be better than them, that doesn't make them fearful. That doesn't make them walk away from the game. That pushes them to compete. And you see, this is true on a human level, but it's also true on an economic level. And if government stays out of the way and allows that human drive to compete for excellence to be part of the market force, wow, we've got great economies. So most of my conversations that had anything to do with Shanghai and the freer economic zone there, most of my conversations in Hong Kong last week were really about how to exploit that. The Hong Kong business people are thinking, what a great opportunity. They're not thinking, and they're also thinking how great it would be if they could do this in other cities as well. I have a story about Hong Kong that really dovetails with our issues in Hawaii. I just want to stop here and let you two weigh in on that. Doesn't that make sense that that free market thinking is sometimes counterintuitive to the way most people think in our not so free markets?
Well, let me throw this question at both of you. I mean, so here's one of those ideas that could be the subject of what do you want to call it? Idea arbitrage. How can we learn from this here? Is there anything that you observed about, free market zones that would be useful here? Don't answer right now because we're going to take a short break, but in a minute. Keli'i Akina and Malia Blom Hill. Keli'i is in Beijing and Malia is in Washington, D.C. We're talking about Grassroot in China, week number 2, here on Ehana Kako. We'll be right back after this break.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Horry for ThinkTech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone number 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
Jones Act. Okay, we're back. We're live. That's the voice of Keli'i Akina. He's in Beijing, and Malia Blom Hill. She's in Washington, D.C. We're doing Ehana Kako here on a Monday afternoon. We're talking about Grassroot in China, week number 2. So my question, Keli'i, if you don't mind, and Malia, if you don't mind, what can we use from your experience here to bring back to the U.S. or to Hawaii in the way of free trade zones?
Yes, how do we
Go ahead, Lily.
Oh, I'm sorry. How do we convince Hawaii to sort of let go of the protectionist impulse? Because it's definitely part of our culture. Maybe it comes out of the isolation that we've spent so long under, and we still kind of have an isolation mentality. But we can look at the Jones Act, but we can look at all sorts of things. I mean, look at our education system. Everywhere where the possibility of competition to strengthen the system. I mean, we have nothing in the way of true education competition. We have nothing in the way of shipping competition, and it raises our prices. Everywhere we can, we seem to have this tendency to, let's protect the jobs. Let's, maybe that's partly to do with labor and unions, and that leads into, a whole different topic of Hawaii's history with labor and unions. But we do have this protectionist impulse that flies completely in the face of this idea of competition strengthening the market.
That's a great question. It's a mindset. It really is. We think oftentimes that competition is a bad thing, but that's a position of weakness. When one sees competition as a bad thing, one is operating from a losing frame of reference, one that doesn't have much self-confidence. When competitors who are excellent, who are striving to be the best themselves, encounter others who are more excellent, it motivates them to do better. And so what we have to do is start with the idea that competition actually is a good thing. The other thing is we have to tell the truth. There are a lot of people who believe that competitive free markets actually hurt people because they leave the non-competitive out of the market. In other words, if you have a wonderful healthcare insurance system because you've got thousands of companies competing to provide the needs of consumers, and consumers can pick and choose what they want, and will ultimately choose what is best and better and motivate the providers to do that. Then we think, what about the people who are left out of the system? And so let's completely scrap that system and build a system based upon forcing people into one model so that we take care of those who lose through competition. The reality is that in the Hawaii healthcare market, we had a system of providing insurance to the vast majority, 90% of the population, that worked because the market forces worked with a little bit of help from the government, a little more than I would care to have, but still it worked. And we scrap this because we are sentimental about those who may not be able to make it through competition. But here's the truth. The truth is, if we really care about the poorest in society, if we really care about the lower middle class and the poor, what is good for them is if the rest of society is highly competitive. And this has been documented. One of the writers we sometimes use is Stephen Moore of the Wall Street Journal. You know that name, Malia. He wrote a book called Who's the Fairest of Them All? And in that book, he identified the different kinds of economies throughout the world. And his research basically shows this, that when you take all the economies that are central control, top down, in order to provide for the needs of the ones at the lowest rung of society, and compare them to the economies that are highly competitive and left alone by the government, it is that latter group, the competitive economies, that produce a society that meet the needs of the poor. It's an interesting thing. That economy produces wealth. That wealth makes a better society. The services are better, and philanthropy flourishes in such society. And so we have to change the way we think, Malia. We have to tell everyone in Hawaii competition is good, and if you care about the non-competitive like the poor, a competitive society is better. And that's where the ideas have to change. By the way, there's a great book, Jonathan Gulf.
Thank you. Well, you know, it's really an interesting experience to hear you talk about competition and the freer the better while you're in China, which is a top-down, government-controlled economy. And, must wonder if they're listening. Do you think they're listening, Keli'i?
Anyway. Yeah, they are listening, and they're actually ahead of the game. That's why many of them see what Hong Kong does and tries to reproduce it. Now, here's the fear in Hong Kong. The fear in Hong Kong is not that Shanghai is going to be a competitor. No, Hong Kong business people want to have 10 Shanghais out there, want to multiply the number of free economic zones. Here's the fear. The fear in Hong Kong is that government tampers. And as much as Beijing has wanted to let Hong Kong be its own entity because it's a jewel out there, government bureaucrats tend to have to expand their practice. So in 2010, Hong Kong adopted a law that required businesses to provide a minimum wage to employees. That was the first time that ever happened in Hong Kong. Now think about that. All across our country, we have the minimum wage. And our grassroots analysis, Malia, tell us in a nutshell, what's our grassroots analysis about the minimum wage?
Oh, in a nutshell, government minimum wage laws counterintuitively hurt the people they're meant to protect. They drive out they artificially inflate things. They drive out competition. They basically create jobs that then can't become subsistence jobs for people at the bottom of the employment ladder.
Yes,
and they discourage hiring. Sorry.
Absolutely. So Hong Kong is more afraid of government starting to grow and tamper with the freer market than it is about the emergence of other freer markets. But the analysis is quite interesting for Hawaii, because as I asked different businessmen, how did the minimum wage law get passed? What was the impetus for that? Was it Hong Kong? Was it Beijing wanting to control Hong Kong? An interesting answer emerged, and I've heard this answer over and over. The answer was, it's the unions. It was the unions, the labor unions, And there are very strong labor unions that are involved in the industries of construction in Hong Kong, which is actually not the growing sector economically, because Hong Kong is, well, construction construction is a growing sector, but the manufacturing is not a growing sector so much in terms of labor. But there are unions in Hong Kong, and the unions were the ones who pushed the minimum wage law for the natural reason that this would ensure a better wage for union workers. But the irony is that most Hong Kong people realize that the vast majority, 90% of union workers, are well above the minimum wage already. And so it doesn't accomplish the outcome that it wants, and instead it's counterproductive. But basically the analysis is those unions are in place to carry out a function that they no longer need to be the guardians of, because the market is giving these workers such higher wages in any case.
We're about out of time. And we're going to go to our next show in a minute, which is Local Notes with Jason Smith. But it's really thrilling to talk to you and Malia. Really thrilling to have this worldwide hookup. And I'm looking forward to next week, when next week will be, what, Grassroot in China, week number 3.
And by the way, by that time I'll have a lot to tell you about all my meetings in Beijing, and that will give us a different perspective. In Beijing, we'll see people who are trying to promote free markets, individual liberty, in the context of the power center of Asia, Beijing.
Thank you, Keli'i. Thank you, Malia. That's Keli'i Akina, Malia Blom Hill, both of Grassroot. Thank you so much. Another great show. We'll talk to you soon, next week anyway. Aloha.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.